This is what happened to the Raptors. LeBron James happened to the Raptors.
We'll be back to LeBronto for the fourth quarter after this.
Kyle Lowry has had a reputation, an earned reputation, of being a poor playoff performer.
Is it time to blow this team up?
Yes, it is.
Throws up the floater.
You get a team in the Raptors who quit.
The Raptors, the 2019 NBA champs.
The date is May 7th, 2018, and the Toronto Raptors had just lost in sweeping fashion to the Cleveland Cavaliers. For the third straight year, LeBron James had danced on Toronto's grave, embarrassing their franchise and kicking their best efforts into the Shadow Realm. Toronto was on the brink of tearing it all down, trading everyone for picks and entering a rebuild. Their roster, with Demar DeRozan leading the way, had reached its ceiling, and many spectators believed the only way out was to wave the white flag. Everyone remembers what transpired next: the Kawhi Leonard trade, the hiring of Nick Nurse as the head coach, and the championship run that ensued. But few remember the struggle the Raptors had gone through before to make it to this point. Their Kawhi acquisition and Nick Nurse promotion may have taken the headlines, but there were multiple other moves and key choices that were made that influenced their 2019 ring. In order to succeed, you must fail. This quote is a perfect representation of the Raptors franchise, and why their inevitable championship run was so meaningful. How did Toronto overcome their past playoff nightmares they faced? And how did they escape the claws of NBA infamy? This is how the Toronto Raptors built their championship team and saved their franchise from NBA purgatory. Kawhi Leonard may have been the player that guided Toronto to the promised land, but before him, DeMar DeRozan was trying to achieve the same goal. DeRozan was drafted at the 9th spot in 2009 to a Raptors team that was stuck in mediocrity, with Chris Bosh being the team's best player. For the next 9 years, DeMar would quickly grow from a little-known lottery pick to the franchise's beloved star. From the beginning, DeMar embraced the city of Toronto. He was proud to be a Raptor and helped build their state-of-the-art team culture that is well respected today. When Chris Bosh unsurprisingly departed in the summer of 2010 to Miami, DeMar DeRozan tweeted, "Don't worry, I got us." While other stars were leaving for the bright lights and warm beaches of Florida, DeMar had no problem remaining in Canada, and Raptors fans admired that. The NBA world had yet to be exposed to DeMar's game, and the Raptors were left forgotten as their only star for the last 7 years had left in the blink of an eye. From 2009 to 2012, the Raptors saw DeMar DeRozan take jumps offensively each year, rising to one of the more premier young stars in the game. The team struggled record-wise, winning just 22 games in 2010-11 and 23 games in 2011-12. During this time, the Raptors drafted big man Jonas Valanciunas with the 5th pick in the 2011 draft, and fired their head coach Jay Triano in favor of Dwayne Casey, who would evolve into one of the league's most esteemed and respected coaches. Overall, the team still had a long way to go in terms of constructing the proper talent needed to make the playoffs. But little did fans know, in early July of 2012, Toronto was about to make one of the most important trades in their franchise's history. The summer of 2012 saw the Raptors grab 2 key players that would become valuable assets to their franchise, one of them being Terrence Ross out of the University of Washington. Toronto drafted Ross at the number 8 spot in the 2012 draft. He would evolve into a high-flying sharpshooter for their squad. The draft results may have been encouraging, but what really stole the attention was Toronto's free agency saga. The team wanted a star point guard to pair alongside their forward in DeRozan, and first targeted the future Hall of Famer Steve Nash from Phoenix. Yeah, he was 37 years old and his window didn't match DeRozan's whatsoever. But Brian Colangelo, the general manager of the team, licked his chops at the idea of Nash being a Raptor. He could be a culture changer. Toronto went as far as offering a poison pill contract to New York Knicks forward Landry Fields, in an attempt to eliminate the Knicks as a possible sign-and-trade team to acquire Nash. By stealing Fields from New York, the Knicks had no assets to try and grab Nash, leaving the mighty Raptors as the only team left in the Steve Nash sweepstakes. Congratulations, Raptors! You can now target a 37-year-old Steve Nash, the all-star point guard Brian Colangelo has always dreamed of. He signed with the Lakers? Uh-oh. That's right. After all of the effort the Raptors had done to put themselves in a position to grab Nash, the two-time MVP had instead opted for Los Angeles. A heartbreaking set of events, and now the team was left with Landry Fields, who was on an overpaid contract. Colangelo poorly fumbled the Nash situation, and rushed to try and find another point guard to add to the team. Houston Rockets guard Kyle Lowry emerged from the smoke as a target, and Toronto wasted no time, trading Gary Forbes and a slightly protected 2013 first-round pick to get him. A trade that would go down as one of the biggest wins for any team ever. The Raptors got their point guard for the next 8 years in Lowry. This was a key decision that ultimately led to Toronto's inevitable championship run. The Raptors got perhaps the greatest player in their franchise's history for a role player and a pick. But fans didn't know this at the time. To many, Lowry was viewed as an in-his-prime point guard. After all, he was 26. But what little realized is that he wasn't even close to reaching his full potential. A phenomenal move by the Raptors front office, but unfortunately for them, this great decision would be followed by poor ones. Fast forward 12 months to the summer of 2013, and the amount of playoff appearances in the Lowry-DeRozan era stood at 0. The 2012-13 season was one of disappointment for the franchise. The team won just 34 games, and general manager Brian Colangelo was on the hot seat. Their January 2013 trade for scoring forward Rudy Gay had turned out to be a disaster. Gay's inefficient, ball-dominant playstyle that relied on mid-range shooting was redundant alongside DeRozan and Terrence Ross. Gay was also overpaid. He was owed $38 million over the next 2 seasons, which hampered the team's salary. Not only was Rudy paid a pretty penny, but former 2006 #1 pick Andrea Bargnani was also owed $22 million over the next 2 years, which was far more than what he was worth. Toronto was now digging themselves into a salary cap nightmare, and they needed to escape it. The team had an intriguing core, but changes were necessary, and it started at the top. On May 21st, 2013, Brian Colangelo was fired, with Masai Ujiri replacing him. Ujiri was the reigning Executive of the Year with the Denver Nuggets, and he would be the man who was responsible for some of the greatest decisions that led to the Raptors' 2019 ring. Immediately, Ujiri traded Andrea Bargnani and his bad contract, shipping him off to New York. Masai was fearless. He showed early on that he was willing to do whatever it took to put the franchise in a better position, even if that meant putting his job on the line. The Raptors had cleaned up house, ridding themselves of a poor contract, but it soon became apparent that more work needed to be done. Once the Raptors opened up the 2013-14 season playing mediocre basketball, Rudy Gay was traded to Sacramento in December of 2013 for a bunch of role players. Gravis Vasquez, John Salmons, Patrick Patterson, and Chuck Hayes may not have been iconic all-star level talent, but they were players who had contracts that were set to expire in the near future. Masai had gotten rid of Rudy Gay, who had a bad contract and was a horrible fit in Toronto, for salary space. This move didn't just clear up the Raptors' awkward cap situation, but it allowed DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry to take the reins as the unequivocal stars in the North. This was their time now. It was the Lowry-DeRozan era in Toronto, and those coveted playoff appearances would soon follow. The Raptors, after starting off 6-12, finished the season with 48 dubs and the 3rd seed. It may have ended with a round 1 exit to the Brooklyn Nets in 7, but still, the Raptors had made the playoffs. It was their first postseason appearance in 6 years. They had won 14 more games than the prior year, and had finally gained what they had lacked for so long, an identity. Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan were the captains of this ship. Both players embraced the city of Toronto, and the Raptors were building what would be a respected franchise culture of hard work and intelligent decisions. Toronto would ride this wave of confidence to yet another successful regular season. They won 49 games during the 2014-15 campaign. The franchise had established themselves as an Eastern Conference contender, with mighty expectations entering the postseason. But Toronto would quickly be taught a valuable lesson, and that's that they were a long way from the top. In round 1 of the 2015 playoffs, Toronto was smacked with a harsh dose of reality, being swept in humiliating fashion by the Washington Wizards. DeMar and Lowry both played mediocre basketball. Instead of elevating their game come playoff time, they were okay. Lowry went from 17 a game in the regular season to 12, and DeRozan didn't look like the go-to clutch scorer fans had hoped for. Before this series, spectators had believed that Toronto was far more talented than Washington, but they found out the hard way that that was incorrect. The Wizards delivered a crushing blow to Toronto, ending their season. In this time of panic, Masai Ujiri needed to remain focused. He went back to the drawing board and assembled what would be the best Raptors team in years. The summer of 2015 was the first prime example of Masai Ujiri striking gold in the draft. He acquired the 46th pick, Norman Powell, from the Bucks. Powell would become a key piece on the 2019 Raptors squad, and it certainly wouldn't be the last time Toronto would turn a late pick in the draft into something special. Toronto also brought in Tamari Carroll, Corey Joseph, and Bismack Biyombo. These three wouldn't stick around for 2019, but they were cheap pickups who were a massive part in the Raptors' 2016 Eastern Conference Finals run. That's right, the 2015-16 season saw Toronto win the most games in their franchise's history to that point. 56 Ws. The Raptors hovered around a few games over 500 for the first few months of the season, but once the new year came around, they turned it up a notch. They went on an 11-game winning streak, with DeMar and Lowry both averaging career highs in points. The Raptors rode the wave of their two All-Stars, excellent bench, and solid head coach all the way to the number 2 seed, with an overwhelming amount of hype to their name. This team was no joke anymore. The duo of DeRozan and Lowry were quickly becoming one of the most feared pairings in the league. Toronto beat the Paul George-led Indiana Pacers in 7 in round 1, and scraped by in 7 as well to the Dwayne Wade-led Miami Heat in round 2. DeRozan and Lowry may have taken all the praise, but Toronto had lethal depth, with players like Norman Powell, Corey Joseph, and Terrence Ross all stepping up in rounds 1 and 2. Against Miami in the Eastern Conference semifinals, it was Bismack Biyombo who stole the show, evolving from a no-name bench player to a phenomenal shot blocker. His greatest moment against the Heat came in the second quarter of Game 5, where Biyombo dunked, blocked Dwayne Wade, and threw it down again. This is what the Raptors culture was all about. Finding players who were ignored by other teams, and turning them into pivotal contributors once they landed in Toronto. The North had made it to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in their franchise's history, a remarkable run led by their two stars, savvy coaching and great depth. And now, they were up against the strongest opponent they had ever faced. LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers stood above all in the Eastern Conference. While the Raptors had struggled against each team they played and had to go to 7 in both series, the Cavaliers had spit on each of their opponents, sweeping both the Pistons and Hawks in humiliating fashion. A daunting task was ahead. and it looked like the Raptors were just another team on the floor mat for the Cavs to step on. Cleveland destroyed the Raptors in games 1 and 2, jumping to a 2-0 lead heading back to Toronto. The Raptors had two choices from this point. They could either lay down and die, or stand strong and put up a fight. They chose to fight. The Raptors won Game 3 by 15, and Game 4 by 6, with Demar and Lowry stepping it up at home and out-dueling LeBron and Kyrie. As the final seconds of Game 4 ticked off, exhilaration filled Toronto. The Raptors were just 2 wins away from reaching the NBA Finals, the farthest they'd ever been in their franchise's history. At this very moment, any and all questions regarding the franchise and their roster were silenced. There was pure, deafening joy echoing throughout the walls of the Air Canada Centre. This was the last win of Toronto's amazing 2016 playoff run though. A finals run would have been a dream come true, but this dream was put on hold as Toronto was hit with a harsh dose of reality. They just weren't good enough to beat the Cavs. These two teams would meet once again both in 2017 and 2018, and shockingly enough, this run in 2016 was the most competitive series the Raptors had to offer. They tinkered with their depth, made bold trades, tried to acquire LeBron stoppers, but still, each time, Cleveland steamrolled them. Nevertheless, at this point in June of 2016, the Raptors had surpassed their expectations, and Toronto's front office was about to hit the jackpot in the draft. The summer of 2016 was yet another example of Masai playing his cards right. In the 2016 draft, they selected Pascal Siakam with the 27th pick, and signed undrafted man Fred VanVleet a few days later. Nothing much was made of these moves at the time, but little did fans know, the Raptors had just snagged 2 future All-Stars. It's easy for these decisions to be overlooked in the grand scheme of things, but without these 2 players, the Raptors' 2019 championship would cease to be achieved. These amazing draft decisions wouldn't translate to postseason success though. In fact, what followed these moves were pure misery. In the 2017 playoffs, after the Raptors won 51 games and landed the 3rd seed, they were swept in round 2 by the Cavaliers in nightmare fashion. Even with new midseason additions like PJ Tucker and Serge Ibaka, the end result was a big fat L. The duo of Demar and Kyle struggled. Lowry suffered an ankle injury in Game 2, which sidelined him for both Games 3 and 4. DeRozan struggled to keep the team afloat without his partner in crime. He may have scored an impressive 37 points in Game 3, but this was only after he laid an egg in Game 2, where he scored just 5 points on 2 of 11 shooting. The Cavs destroyed the Raptors in 3 out of the 4 games, an even more devastating ending than the prior year. An unfortunate series loss to LeBron James and the Cavs had come the Raptors' way yet again, but hopes were still high in Toronto. LeBron may have been the king of the East for now, but his co-star Kyrie Irving had just been traded, making the Cavaliers significantly weaker as a team. The Eastern Conference seemed wide open, with Toronto appearing to be the squad up for the task. Their roster was only getting better. In the summer of 2017, they drafted forward OG Anunoby at the 23rd pick. In just 3 summers, with no top 20 picks, the Raptors had added Fred VanVleet, Norman Powell, Pascal Siakam, and OG Anunoby. Phenomenal decision making by Masai Ujiri and his crew. Nobody knew it at the time in the fall of 2017, but this would be the final year of the DeMar DeRozan-Kyle Lowry era. Everything they had built would come down to how they played in this one final season, and in the beginning, it was fantastic. The 2017-18 Toronto Raptors were a force to be reckoned with in the regular season, winning a franchise record 59 games. Their famous bench mob is what many remember this team for. Players like Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, and Norman Powell were offensive dynamos that could burn any other second unit. DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry were all-stars per usual. and Demar himself had a career year, finishing number 8 in MVP voting. DeRozan was an all-star starter, making SportsCenter every night for his high-flying jams. By far, the greatest moment of the season for him came in a nationally televised matchup against the Detroit Pistons, where Demar, with the Raptors down by 1, ran down the length of the court and threw down an absurd and one poster dunk.
DeMar DeRozan, 6 to go, right all the way to the bucket. Dynamite! Detonates on Detroit!
The opposing arena was stunned and sent into a frenzy. This was the defining moment of the season. DeMar DeRozan was cold-blooded. There to greet him after the dunk was Kyle Lowry, who was ecstatic, jumping up and down like a kid. The thought of these two eventually winning a championship together would be a dream come true for Raptors fans. This game wasn't over yet though. The Pistons tied it and forced overtime, where Fred VanVleet nailed a corner 3 to grab the W. It may have just been a win against the mediocre Detroit Pistons, but this game showed the clutch potential that Toronto had. Any player could step up. The Raptors earned the second best record in the league, and the best win total in the East by a 4-game margin. 59 W's was the most in their team's history, with 2 stars, the Coach of the Year in Dwayne Casey, and full home court advantage throughout the playoffs. This squad had the most hype out of any Raptors team ever. This could finally be the year where they silenced the doubters and made a championship run, but that didn't happen. After Toronto won round 1 against the 8-seeded Washington Wizards in 6, a familiar foe met them in round 2, the Cleveland Cavaliers. For 2 straight years, the Cavs had ended each and every one of the Raptors' many attempts at a championship run. Now, in 2018, Toronto had their strongest team yet. This was their chance to get their vengeance and show the league that they could beat LeBron. But instead, one of the most infamous beatdowns in basketball history took place. Game 1 kicked off in Toronto with that sweet home court advantage, but unfortunately, the Raptors lost in heartbreaking fashion. The team had a chance to take the lead with just 12 seconds left in the 4th, but missed 5 potential game-winning shots. 5. VanVleet missed, DeRozan missed, Valanciunas missed, and the Raptors failed to capitalize on the golden opportunity that was given to them. That wasn't all. In overtime, with the Raptors down by 1, Fred VanVleet had an open 3 once again, but bricked it, and time expired. This horribly comical ending perfectly illustrated how, for whatever reason, the Raptors couldn't get over the mental hump that was required to beat the Cavs. In Game 2, it was the LeBron James show, and he embarrassed the franchise. LeBron spent the entire second half working on his jump shot, whether it was 3-pointers, fall-away mid-range shots, or strong finishes. LeBron James abused and eviscerated Toronto's seemingly impenetrable defense. The Air Canada Centre crowd that was famous for its echoing sound had gone quiet. Every fan was left shocked as their team was picked apart shot by shot. Game 3 on the road in Cleveland was their final chance at salvation, and Toronto actually showed life. It was a tie game with 8 seconds left. All the Raptors needed to do was lock up on defense and win the overtime battle. The Cavs inbounded to LBJ. LeBron brought the ball up calmly and threw up an impossible floater that banked in, giving the Cavs the win and a 3-0 lead. An unbelievably painful, gutting loss to a team that wasn't even well constructed outside of LeBron. And this was the Raptors' breaking point. No ending was more fitting than a completion of the sweep in Game 4, where the Raptors gave up. DeMar DeRozan's final play as a Raptor was a flagrant 2 foul, where he slapped Jordan Clarkson in the face on a fast break layup. He scored 8 points on 3 of 12 shooting in Game 3, and 13 points on 5 of 11 shooting in Game 4. A 17 points per game average for the series was pitiful. He and his team were mocked on social media, being called LeBronto. The Raptors went from being praised for winning 59 games and achieving home court advantage in the playoffs, to now being ridiculed, because no matter what they did, No matter how many accomplishments they attained, none of it mattered because they just couldn't beat LeBron. What many forget about the ending of this series is that it appeared that Toronto's days of contending were over. The prediction was that they would soon enter a rebuild and trade any and all key pieces for picks. But as we all know, that didn't happen. The Raptors first started off by firing the Coach of the Year winner in Dwayne Casey, a decision that shocked many, but ultimately made sense. Casey had too many playoff failures on his resume. To replace him, Nick Nurse, the assistant coach of the team, was promoted. It wasn't the biggest, flashiest name, but to Ujiri, Nurse was ready for the job. This coaching swap wouldn't be the only major change the team went through though. Masai Ujiri and the Raptors front office felt Demar DeRozan wasn't fit to be the #1 option on a championship team, so they explored the trade market. Kawhi Leonard of the San Antonio Spurs soon became a target, and the Raptors jumped on it. When Kawhi was healthy and on the court, his talent was clear. He was the 2014 Finals MVP with San Antonio, and an elite two-way athlete. The only problem was that he had requested a trade from the Spurs, and had been sidelined for the past year with a mysterious quad injury. That wasn't the only risk involved. Kawhi was also an expiring contract. He could simply join the team and bolt 1 year later. Masai Ujiri was putting his job and career on the line for one chance at a ring. Everything he had built for 6 years could crumble if this situation went south. On July 18, 2018, the Raptors pulled the trigger, sending DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a 2019 first-round pick to San Antonio for Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. Kawhi was now a Raptor, with 3&D wing Danny Green joining him, a trade that sent shockwaves through the NBA world. Toronto immediately received criticism from fans who felt they had betrayed DeRozan's trust, and on social media, DeMar wasn't too pleased. It was a difficult decision to make, but Masai Ujiri was rolling the dice and making the move that he felt was best, and was prepared for the flack that came with it. Outside of this massive trade, the roster remained exactly the same. It wouldn't be easy, but the Raptors were putting all of their eggs in this upcoming season, and it paid off. The 2018-19 Toronto Raptors won 58 games and landed the 2nd seed, with Kawhi quickly reminding everyone of the superstar caliber player he was. That wasn't all. Pascal Siakam, the late first-round pick back in 2016, erupted, winning the Most Improved Player award. The squad had unreal depth. Nick Nurse proved to be a legit head coach, and the 1-2 star punch of Kawhi and Lowry was fiery. But still, Masai Ujiri wanted more. In mid-February of 2019, the Raptors, who were 40-17, traded Jonas Valanciunas, CJ Miles, Delon Wright, and a 2nd-round pick for Grizzlies big man Marc Gasol. Toronto had one of the best records in the league during this time, but still, they wanted to make their team as great as possible. Masai was thinking ahead. He knew that Toronto had a chance of encountering dominant big men Joel Embiid and Giannis Antetokounmpo in the playoffs, so he prepared. The Raptors were stacked from head to toe, and entered the 2019 postseason with mixed expectations. Some viewed this squad as a favorite to take the Eastern Conference, while others were far more skeptical. There were many doubters who believed the old choking Raptors of the past would emerge, that Kyle Lowry would fold, that Nick Nurse wasn't ready for primetime, that Pascal Siakam was young, and Kawhi Leonard couldn't lead a team to the promised land. Were the Raptors as a franchise just cursed? It certainly appeared that way based on the recent playoff misery. But against all odds, playing the fiercest of opponents, they won the 2019 championship. So how did they do it? In round 1 against the 7-seeded Orlando Magic, Toronto won in 5, dominating the Magic with 4 straight wins following a Game 1 loss. In round 2 against the Philadelphia 76ers, Kawhi Leonard elevated his play to legendary status to advance. The Sixers had 4 All-Stars, but the one-man show in Kawhi outdueled them, averaging 35 a game. In Game 1, Kawhi dropped 45 points, and in Game 4, he scored 39. His game was all fundamentals. He remained perfectly calm, destroying the opposing defender. Whether it was Jimmy Butler or Ben Simmons guarding him, it didn't matter. This mind-boggling level of dominance continued in what we now know as one of the greatest Game 7s in NBA history. Kawhi Leonard saved the Raptors' season, scoring 41 points with 3 steals, and of course, hitting the shot that will be talked about for the rest of basketball history. With 4 seconds left, Kawhi caught the basketball, dribbled it across the perimeter, and threw up a prayer that was answered.
Defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?
And DeMar DeRozan is done.
Neither DeRozan nor Kyle Lowry are good enough to play hero ball at the end of games and win.
Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green going north. Are you kidding? I mean, is there somebody here that believes that Toronto Raptors with Kawhi Leonard are title contenders?
An off-balance two-pointer that bounced 4 times before dropping through. Kawhi Leonard had won the series for Toronto and had sent them to round 3. One of the greatest, most iconic moments in NBA history. The Raptors had beaten the Sixers. Toronto carried this momentum into the Eastern Conference Finals, where they destroyed Milwaukee in 6 after initially falling to a 2-0 deficit. The Raptors had made it to the NBA Finals, beating the 60-win Bucks, led by an MVP in Giannis. A day that many thought would never come had been realized. The Raptors were now 4 wins away from a ring. The ending to this story is a perfect set of events that will echo throughout the city of Toronto for the rest of eternity. The Raptors won the NBA Finals in 6, beating the Steph Curry-led Golden State Warriors on the biggest stage in basketball, and ending their sports nightmare. The goal that had been tirelessly worked towards had been achieved. The moment itself of hoisting the trophy in Oracle Arena felt great, but the journey it took to make it to this point was even greater. In 2018, the Toronto Raptors looked like they were destined to remain ringless for the indefinite future. It seemed like they had reached their ceiling, and had no way out but to rebuild. Masai Ujiri then took matters into his own hands, firing the Coach of the Year winner in Dwayne Casey, hiring Nick Nurse, and trading the greatest player in their franchise's history up until that point for Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. These 2 moves alone didn't win the Raptors their 2019 championship though. It was a series of moves, long before this, that assisted them. The drafting of Pascal Siakam in 2016, and the signing of undrafted player Fred VanVleet greatly helped them as well. Their decision to trade Rudy Gay and Andrea Bargnani freed them up of salary space that could have otherwise been wasted. The acquisitions of Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol in 2017 and 2019 were calculated moves, and the 2 big men would provide phenomenal defense during their championship run. Most importantly, the Kyle Lowry trade made back in 2012 netted them who many consider to be the best Raptor ever. Kyle Lowry continued to improve over the years, and erased all the negative nicknames, calling him a playoff choker with this ring. When looking at the Raptors' 2019 championship trophy, it's easy to overlook all of the misery and difficult decisions that came before that point. What makes the 2019 ring that much more meaningful is that at one point, it seemed like a dream. Then, Masai Ujiri made some changes. The once unknown prospects of the past grew into key contributors. Kawhi Leonard evolved into a monster, and that dream became a reality.